My name is Iris MacLeod, and I'm 31 years old. On the night of my own birthday, my mother didn't hand me a card. She handed me an apron, a new one, still creased from the packaging, while 40 guests stood around our family's warehouse, toasting my brother Boyd's brand new truck with a $62,000 bow on the hood. My father gave the toast. He said Boyd deserved a fresh start, a real one this time, and the room lifted their glasses and believed him, because that's what you do when the MacLeods throw a party. You believe them. I tied the apron on. I served every plate. When the man by the space heater made a joke about not tipping the help, I smiled at him and asked if he wanted the last of the brisket. That night, I left with one thing: a plain white envelope my grandfather had pressed into my hands 9 months before he died, his handwriting on the front, the seal unbroken. Don't open it unless they go for the deed, he'd told me. If they do, it's yours. All of it. 11 days later, my father called me at 7 in the morning, crying. He thought I had simply walked away. He had no idea what I was already holding. Welcome back to Mr. Nathaniel Stories, where real people draw real lines and quietly come out standing. If tonight's story sounds familiar, you're exactly where you should be. Leave a comment and subscribe so the next one finds you. To understand the envelope, you have to understand what MacLeod's building supply is, and what I was to it for 7 years. My grandfather, Alec MacLeod, built that business out of a rented yard and a single flatbed truck outside of Napanee, Ontario in 1981. Lumber, drywall, roofing materials. He knew every contractor, every developer, every DIY homeowner who had ever called for a quote on 200 sheets of plywood. By the time I was a teenager, MacLeod's had a proper warehouse, a yard stacked with inventory, and 8 full-time staff. It was the kind of business that held a town together without anyone noticing until it wasn't there. When my grandfather's health started slipping in 2017, I stepped in. I was 24. I had just finished a bookkeeping certificate, and I had, according to my father, a head for numbers. What I actually had was a fear of watching my grandfather's life's work fall apart, because no one else could read a receivables ledger. So I came in 3 days a week, then 5. Then I was there before the yard opened and still there after it closed, running payroll, chasing overdue invoices, managing supplier accounts across the province. My father ran the floor. My mother handled customer relations, which really meant she answered the phone with a warm voice and passed everything complicated to me. And my grandfather, when he was well enough, sat in the back office on a stool he'd kept since 1983 and told anyone who'd listen that the business ran itself. It did not run itself. I ran it. In our family, that was called helping out. I was paid $56,000 a year, which my father described as a family wage and said with genuine warmth, the way you'd hand someone a gift. Once I asked, carefully, what an operations manager with my responsibilities might earn in the broader market. He laughed and squeezed my shoulder. You're not just an operations manager, he said. You're a MacLeod. That means something the market doesn't know how to price. I let it go. I always let it go. I hadn't taken a real vacation in 5 years. My birthday fell in late April, which is spring rush in building supply, so I'd spent the last 4 of them answering emails at my kitchen table. When the commercial freezer in the warehouse failed one January, and the insurance claim took 6 weeks to process, I put the repair on my personal credit card and told myself I'd be reimbursed before the interest hit. I was not reimbursed. I kept a folder of those receipts, not because I planned to use them, because some quiet part of me needed proof that I had been there, that those years had happened, even if no one was going to say so. Boyd is my younger brother. He's 26, and I love him the way you love someone whose messes you have been cleaning up since childhood, not without tenderness, but not without exhaustion either. He has had, by my count, 3 fresh starts. The first was the landscaping company he opened in 2020, financed with $18,000 from my parents' savings, and a great deal of family talk about entrepreneurship. It lasted 14 months. When it closed, it left behind supplier debts, 2 leased mowers nobody returned properly, and a $95,000 balance on a business line of credit my father had quietly co-signed without telling anyone. Nobody said co-signed. They said Boyd had been unlucky. My mother said he just needed everyone behind him this time, and everyone got behind him, because that was how it worked in our family. There was one child permitted to fall apart, and one child designated to hold everything together while the falling happened. The second fresh start was a move to Calgary that lasted 8 months and ended with my parents covering first and last month's rent on a new place in Napanee when he came back. The third was the truck. My mother called me 3 weeks before my birthday. She said they were doing something for me this year, something real, and my chest did an embarrassing hopeful thing. I said yes before she finished asking. Of course I would help with setup. I drove to the warehouse on a Saturday evening in late April. I arranged the folding chairs. I laid out the food I'd picked up from the caterer on my way. I had made a potato salad from scratch because Boyd had texted me 2 days earlier. OMG, can you bring your potato salad? Everyone's going to be there. And I had made it, the whole large batch, because everyone's going to be there had sounded, when I read it, like it meant something about whose night it was. I went to hang the banner above the main entrance. When I unrolled it, I stood there holding the end of it, looking at the word congratulations in gold letters 2 feet high. Not happy birthday, congratulations. I told myself I was misreading it. Then I heard tires on gravel and looked out the side window and saw the truck. It was a Ram 1500, deep navy blue, with a bow on the cab so large it caught the evening wind. My father had hidden it under a tarp against the far fence. He pulled the cover off in one motion when he called everyone outside, the way a person does when they have been planning this moment for a long time and want it to land correctly. He lifted his glass and said, "To Boyd, because a man who's ready to put in the work deserves something to work with." The crowd went up. Boyd covered his face with both hands. Someone near me said the number out loud the way people do at these moments, half impressed and half appalled. 62,000. I did the math without trying. $62,000 for a truck, for a man who still owed $95,000, from a company that had closed 18 months ago. I clapped. I want to say I didn't, but I did. My hands moved before my head could stop them. That was the muscle I'd been building for 7 years, and it fired before I could catch it. That was when my mother appeared at my elbow. She had the apron folded over her arm, and she was wearing the warm, reasonable smile she saved for moments when she was about to ask something that required softening. She held it out. "You know where everything is," she said. "Would you mind? Just for this evening. People are going to want plates soon." My hands took the apron. They had been doing that for 7 years, accepting whatever was extended before my brain could vote. I was refilling water glasses near the lumber display when the man by the space heater, one of my father's old hockey friends, looked over at me and said, loudly enough that the 3 people beside him turned to look, "Watch out, don't tip the help too much, or she'll start expecting a benefits package." People laughed. Easy, reflexive laughter, the kind that happens when something lands, and the room decides together not to look at it too directly. I looked at that man and I heard myself say in a perfectly even voice, "I'll try to earn it." More laughter. They thought I was in on the joke. Across the warehouse, Murray Sproul, the head of yard operations, 23 years at McLeod's, a man who had worked for my grandfather since before I was born, looked up from a conversation near the back and caught my eye. He didn't smile. He gave me one small, deliberate shake of his head, the kind you give someone standing too close to the edge of something, and then he turned back to his conversation. I don't think anyone else noticed, but I did, and it steadied me in a way I didn't have words for yet. My father gave a final toast before the cake. He looked around at everyone, warm and expansive, a man entirely at home in the room he had created. He gestured toward Boyd, then toward me. "One of them keeps us on our toes," he said. "The other one keeps us running. That's just Iris." He said it like a compliment. He meant it as one. The room glanced at me for half a second, and then turned back because there was nothing to see, just the dependable daughter in an apron holding a stack of plates. Under all that noise, I heard my grandfather's voice the way you hear someone's voice years after they're gone, clear and close, like he was standing just to my left. If they go for the deed, it's yours. I cut slices of the birthday cake I had made and served them to my brother's party, piece by piece, and I smiled the entire time. Not because I forgave them, not because I didn't understand exactly what had happened. I smiled because somewhere between the truck and the apron and that toast, I had already left. My body was still there, tying the strings, refilling the punch, but the part of me that had spent 31 years, waiting to be chosen, had quietly stood up and walked out the door, and it was not coming back. That night, after the last car pulled out of the yard, and my mother told me what a help I'd been, I drove to my apartment and packed a bag. Not in anger. I want to be honest about that, because anger would have been easier to explain. I packed the way I do a supply audit, methodically, without sentiment, only what mattered. My laptop, my documents, a week of clothes. And from the bottom of the box in my closet, where I kept things I wasn't ready to face, the envelope. My grandfather had given it to me in August, 8 months before the party. He was thinner by then, tired in the way people get when they are winding down, but his eyes were the same sharp gray they had always been. He'd pressed the envelope into my hands and said, "This is for if they go for the deed." Not before. I'd asked what deed, and he'd almost smiled. "You'll know," he said. He died in November. He was 79. I had kept the envelope in that box through all the months after, through the estate settlement, through the service at St. Mary's where my mother organized the reception and I quietly set up the tables. Nobody went for anything. Life went on the way it always had. The envelope stayed sealed. I slid it into the front pocket of my bag, zipped everything closed, and texted my friend Abby. Could I take her spare room for a few weeks? She said yes before I had finished the message, which told me she had been watching longer than she had ever said. On my way out, I stopped at the warehouse. I let myself in with my key, went to the back office, and left my mother's spare key on the desk beside a sticky note. Inventory is current through Friday, I wrote. Nothing else. I kept my key to the yard gate. I told myself it was because someone had to open Monday morning. That was true. It was also, I understand now, the first quiet thing I did that night that mattered more than it looked like. They didn't call. Not the next morning, not the day after. A woman who always comes back doesn't need to be watched. That assumption was about to work in my favor in a way none of us had imagined. 3 days later, I opened the envelope. I did it at Abby's kitchen table on a Tuesday afternoon, a mug of tea going cold beside me. I slid a butter knife under the seal and unfolded what was inside, expecting a letter, maybe a photograph, some soft goodbye from a man who had never been particularly soft. What I found was a legal document, a certificate on heavy paper and a letter, in that order, and it was the document that stopped my breath. It was a partnership amendment for McLeod's building supply, dated 2021. About a third of the way down the first page, my name appeared in a place I had never imagined seeing it. Successor controlling partner, Iris Catherine McLeod. I read it 4 times before the words would hold still. My grandfather had owned 65% of McLeod's building supply. My parents had always spoken of the business as theirs. My father ran operations. It was a McLeod business, it would stay a McLeod business, but on paper, in the original 1981 partnership agreement, my grandfather had held 65%. My grandmother's share had passed to him when she died. My father held 35%. And in 2021, my grandfather had quietly amended the agreement so that when he died, his 65%, the controlling interest, would not pass to my father. It would pass to me. The language was plain the way lawyers write something when they want it to be impossible to misunderstand. I sat at Abby's kitchen table reading a sentence that said, in measured legal terms, this business belongs to Iris. Then I read his letter, and that was when I cried. He was brief. He had always been brief. He wrote that he had chosen me on purpose, that he had watched what I had done for MacLeod's and what it had cost me, and that he would not let them keep the yard in my good name without giving me the yard. There was one line I have read so many times since that I could say it without looking. You held this place up when I couldn't lift it anymore, and they let you do it without even saying your name. That stops with me. At the very bottom, almost an afterthought, if they ever try to refinance the property, they'll need your signature. Let them call you. Behind the letter was a business card. Gail Weston, Business Law, Kingston. The phone number was underlined twice. I sat with that card for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and left a message. Miss Weston, my name is Iris MacLeod. I think my grandfather left me something I need to understand. Gail called back within the hour, and something in the steadiness of her voice told me she had been expecting this call for a while. The 11 days between the party and my father's phone call were not empty. I won't take you through all of them, because most of rebuilding looks small and unglamorous, and you don't need the hour by hour. What those days were made of was firsts. I picked up a contract bookkeeping position with a logistics company in Kingston. Real work, real pay. The kind of number I had been quietly embarrassed to say aloud near my father. I extended my own apartment lease with my own name and no one else's on it. I slept 8 hours 2 nights running and woke up not knowing, for one still and lovely second, whose problem I was supposed to solve that day. On my second day at the new job, the owner thanked me out loud for catching a reconciliation error before anyone else spotted it. Just a 2-minute exchange over a spreadsheet, and I had to step into the hallway afterward just to breathe. It was such a small thing. But I could not remember the last time anyone at MacLeod's had thanked me for catching something, instead of assuming I would have caught it regardless. Standing in that hallway, I understood something I should have seen years earlier. It was never that I was hard to appreciate. It was that I had been living inside a family where appreciation was a resource they had simply decided not to spend on me. Those days were also made of silence. My silence. I stopped. That is all I did. I stopped doing the unpaid, uncredited work I had been doing for 7 years. And when I stopped, the machine I had been quietly running started to grind. Payroll did not run itself. The supplier portal that required my login locked out after 3 failed attempts. On day 6, my father texted, "Vendor account is locked out. Did you change something? Call me." He sounded more confused than angry, which told me he still believed I had made an error rather than a decision. I hadn't changed a thing. I had only stopped fixing it. It was Gail who connected me with Murray. She had been in contact with my grandfather's estate attorney, who noted that Murray Sproul had been present in the office when the 2021 amendment was signed. Present as a formal witness, twice, on 2 lines. She said I should speak with him before anything else moved forward. I met Murray at the diner on Bridge Street on a Thursday morning. He ordered coffee for both of us without asking and looked at me across the table with the expression of a man who has been waiting a long time to be asked a question he already knows the answer to. "Your grandfather made me read every page before I signed," Murray said. He said he wanted a witness who understood what he was putting his name on, not just a warm body. He wrapped both hands around his mug. He knew this day would come, Iris. He just didn't know which day it would be. Then Murray set his coffee down and his voice shifted. "They're trying to refinance the commercial property," he said. "Did you know that?" I set my fork down. Gail filled in the rest that afternoon. My father had applied for a cash-out refinance on the MacLeod's warehouse and yard, looking to pull out $280,000. Enough to clear Boyd's $95,000 debt, cover the cost of the truck, and leave something left over for what the family kept calling a fresh start. The whole shining night in that warehouse had been financed against a property that, legally and quietly, had become mine 16 months ago. There was a closing date. Gail's voice was steady. "Without the original partnership amendment, and without the consent of the controlling partner, this loan cannot fund. Do you have the original document, Iris?" I looked at my bag by the door. "It's right here," I said. Day 11 was a Friday. I learned later it was also the scheduled closing date for the loan. My father called at 8:47 in the morning. He had called 6 times before that, and I had let them all go. Something made me pick up the 7th. He didn't say hello, he breathed once and then his voice came out shaking. "Iris, please." He stopped, started again. "Please tell me you didn't take the partnership papers with you." I could have pretended not to understand. I didn't, but I didn't hand it to him either. "What papers, Dad?" I asked quietly. I listened to him try to explain his way around a corner he had built himself. The bank had called that morning. Something about the ownership structure. About my grandfather's share. About a succession clause that did not match what he had filed. His words came in pieces, and I let them. Then he said the thing he should not have. "If they start pulling the whole file, they'll go back to 2021. You know they will. If they go back that far..." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. That was the real fear under the fear. He was not crying because he had hurt me. He was not even crying about the truck or the apron or my birthday. He was crying because a door he had sealed shut in 2021 had cracked open, and he could feel the cold air coming through it. "Let's keep this in the family," he said. "You bring the papers back and we sort it out between us. All of it. The way we handle things." "The way we handled my birthday," I said. He had no answer for that. I told him I'd be in touch and hung up and sat very still for a full minute. Then I opened the archived files I still had access to on my laptop and typed in a single year. 2021. I already knew what I would find. I had lived it. But there is a difference between carrying something and looking directly at it. That afternoon, I made myself look. In the spring of 2021, McLeod's building supply went through a period where the accounts were far tighter than they should have been. I had been the one to notice the gap, a large transfer out of the operating account that matched no invoice, no supplier, no capital expenditure. I traced it for 3 weeks. It led exactly where some part of me had feared it would lead. My father had authorized a transfer of $80,000 from the business's operating account to cover the early debts from Boyd's landscaping company, before Boyd's business line of credit had even formally collapsed. $80,000 moved out of a company my grandfather owned the controlling share of without my grandfather's knowledge, to quietly fund one more round of rescue for one more of Boyd's failures. I was 28 years old and I covered it. I stretched supplier payment terms. I renegotiated 2 vendor contracts. I took on freelance bookkeeping work on evenings and weekends and used the income to quietly shore up the gap in the business accounts. I never told my grandfather the whole truth of it because I believed I was protecting him, protecting my father's name, protecting the business and everyone in it. And in exchange for saving them, when the accounts were tight that year, and I started holding the line on every single dollar, my family settled on a word for me. Difficult, cold, more interested in numbers than in people. That was what it cost me to save them. A reputation I had never asked for and could not correct without exposing what I had covered. I pulled the archived bank statement and matched it against the ledger entry I had made in my own handwriting 3 years ago. It was still there. A notation in the margin, in pencil, that I had written to myself in 2021, and then buried beneath 2 years of payroll cycles and supplier invoices. Covered, do not discuss. I had built the cover with my own hands. I knew exactly how solid it was. Gail reminded me, carefully, of what I could and could not do. I could not erase my father's debts, or make my brother grow up, or require my mother to be honest. What I could do was refuse to let them mortgage the yard my grandfather had spent 40 years building, and decide, the way he had decided about me, who this place was going to belong to now. That was the whole of my power. It turned out to be more than enough. What I had not known until that week was that my grandfather had known everything. He had seen the 2021 transfer. He had watched me cover it. He had watched my family recast me as difficult for guarding a business I had just rescued for them. And instead of confronting it directly, he had done something quieter and far more lasting. He had changed who would hold MacLeod's when he was gone. His letter finally made complete sense. You held this place up when I couldn't lift it anymore, and they let you do it without even saying your name. That stops with me. My father organized the meeting himself. He called it a family sit-down. He picked MacLeod's warehouse for the setting, his idea of home ground. The invitation that came was warm and reasonable, which is how I knew what it was. Come Saturday,